The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut, echoing through the dead silence of the first-class cabin. A respected man, guilty of nothing but sitting in his rightfully purchased seat, was being treated like a hardened criminal. Passengers whispered, smartphones recorded, and a smug millionaire smirked from the aisle. But what no one on Flight 408 knew, especially the officers dragging him away, was that the man in chains held a secret that was about to cost them everything. The rain in Seattle was relentless, beating against the massive glass windows of SeaTac International Airport in heavy, rhythmic sheets. It was 11:45 p.m., and the terminal was a ghost town of weary travelers, flickering fluorescent lights, and the distinct, stale smell of overpriced coffee. For Dr. Charles Hayes, the weather was just background noise to a bone-deep exhaustion. Charles was a 42-year-old pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon, and he had spent the last 18 hours inside an operating room at Seattle Children's Hospital. He had been flown in specifically to perform a high-risk, incredibly complex arterial switch operation on a 3-day-old infant. The surgery had been a success, a miracle woven by his steady hands, but it had drained every ounce of adrenaline and energy from his body. Now, all he wanted was to board Flight 408 to New York's JFK Airport, sink into his first-class seat, and sleep for the next 5 hours. Because of the urgency of his travel and the messiness of a marathon surgery, Charles wasn't dressed in the tailored suits he usually wore to conferences. Instead, he wore a faded grey university hoodie, a plain white undershirt, dark denim jeans, and a pair of worn-in running shoes. He looked utterly unremarkable. To the untrained eye, he was just another tired guy on a red-eye flight. Furthermore, as a black man dressed in casual streetwear in the middle of the night, Charles was no stranger to the subtle, lingering glances of airport security, or the tightened grips on purses as he walked by. He had learned long ago to compartmentalize it, to push past the societal static and focus on his mission. Tonight, his mission was rest. "Now boarding Zone 1, First Class and Diamond Medallion members," the gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system. Charles grabbed his beat-up leather duffel bag and approached the scanner. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman named Brenda, looked up from her screen. Her eyes darted from Charles's face to his faded hoodie, and then to the glowing priority lane sign. "Sir, this lane is for first class and priority members only," Brenda said, her tone dripping with a polite but unmistakable condescension. "Main cabin boarding will begin in about 15 minutes. Charles didn't sigh, though he wanted to. He simply held up his phone, the digital boarding pass glowing brightly. "Zone 1, he said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "Seat 2A. Brenda blinked, her smile tightening as the scanner beeped a cheerful green confirmation. "My apologies, Mr. Hayes. Have a good flight." "It's Doctor," Charles replied quietly, pulling his phone away and walking down the jet bridge. The cabin of the Boeing 777 was warmly lit, the flight attendants bustling about offering pre-departure beverages in real glassware. Charles found Seat 2A, a spacious window seat on the port side of the aircraft. He hoisted his duffel into the overhead bin, sank into the plush leather chair, and let out a long, slow breath. He slipped his noise-cancelling headphones over his ears, closed his eyes, and felt the familiar, comforting hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit vibrating through the floorboards. He was halfway to sleep when a sharp tap on his shoulder jolted him awake. Charles pulled down one side of his headphones and opened his eyes. Standing in the aisle was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced Wall Street executives. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair slicked back perfectly, a bespoke navy pinstripe suit, and a gold Rolex that gleamed under the overhead reading light. His face was flushed, his jaw set in a hard line of absolute authority. This was Owen Cobb. Owen was the founder of a mid-sized but aggressively ruthless venture capital firm in Manhattan. He was a man who was used to the world bending to his schedule, his money, and his whims. And right now he was looking at Charles not just as an inconvenience, but as an insult. "Excuse me," Owen barked, not waiting for Charles to fully orient himself. "You're in my seat." Charles blinked, the fog of exhaustion momentarily clouding his brain. He looked at the seat number above the window. 2A. "I'm sorry," Charles said, his voice raspy. "This is 2A. "I know what seat it is," Owen snapped, his volume a notch higher than necessary, drawing the attention of the passenger in 1B. "And it's mine. I think you need to head toward the back of the plane. Coach is a few rows down, pal." The microaggression wasn't micro, it was blindingly overt. Owen hadn't bothered to check Charles's ticket. He had taken one look at a black man in a hoodie sitting in a first-class window seat and immediately computed that it was an error. Charles felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the slow burn of justified anger. But he had spent his life mastering his emotions. An operating room required absolute ice in the veins, and he applied that same discipline here. "I think there must be a mix-up with the airline system," Charles said calmly, reaching into his pocket for his phone. "I have 2A. Let me show you my boarding pass." "I don't need to see your phone," Owen scoffed, pulling a crisp, printed paper ticket from his suit jacket. He thrust it into Charles's personal space. "I have the physical ticket. 2A. Now, I've had a very long week, and I'm not going to stand here while you pretend you belong in this cabin. Move." Charles looked at the paper ticket. Sure enough, it said Owen Cobb, seat 2A. Charles unlocked his phone, opening the airline app. "And here is mine. Charles Hayes, seat 2A. Like I said, it's a system glitch. We should call a flight attendant." "A glitch?" Owen laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Right, a glitch. Or maybe you just screenshotted someone else's pass or hacked the app. I know how these things work. I'm a Diamond member. I fly this route twice a week. You are sitting in my seat." The blatant accusation of theft hung in the air, heavy and toxic. A young woman in seat 3A, a freelance investigative journalist named Sarah Jennings, lowered her book. She had been watching the interaction from the start, her eyes narrowing as she clocked Owen's aggressive posture and Charles's remarkably composed demeanor. She quietly slipped her phone out of her purse, thumbing the camera app open, just in case. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" A flight attendant, Chloe Miller, materialized in the aisle. Chloe was young, perhaps 24, and relatively new to the high-stakes diplomacy required in the first-class cabin. She looked instantly overwhelmed, her eyes darting between Owen's furious scowl and Charles's calm, tired face. "Yes, Chloe, there is a problem," Owen said, reading her name tag and immediately adopting a tone of patronizing familiarity. "This man is sitting in my seat. I have my ticket right here. I need him removed so I can sit down." Chloe looked at Owen's paper ticket. "Oh, Mr. Cobb. Yes, I see you're in 2A. I'm so sorry for the confusion." She turned to Charles, her smile strained, her voice dropping an octave as if speaking to a child. "Sir, I'm going to need you to gather your things. We can find your actual seat in the main cabin." Charles stared at her, the sheer audacity of the assumption hitting him like a physical blow. She hadn't even asked to see his ticket. "I am in my actual seat," Charles said, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. He held up his phone, ensuring the screen was bright enough for Chloe to see clearly. "My name is Dr. Charles Hayes. I purchased this ticket 3 days ago. Seat 2A. Chloe leaned in, squinting at the screen. Her face paled slightly as she saw the valid, active boarding pass. "Oh. That's strange. You both have 2A. "It's a fake," Owen interrupted loudly. "It's obviously a fake pass. Look at him, Chloe. Does he look like he paid $3,000 for a first-class ticket? He's trying to scam an upgrade. Get the purser. Get someone with authority." "I am a surgeon," Charles said, his eyes locking onto Owen's with a piercing intensity. "I just spent 18 hours saving a child's life. I am too tired to play games with you, and I am too tired to tolerate your racist assumptions. I am not moving." The word racist acted like a match dropped in a powder keg. "Excuse me!" Owen roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "How dare you play that card with me? I am protecting my property. You are a fraud and a trespasser." The entire cabin was now watching. Sarah Jennings had hit record, the red dot on her screen, blinking as she captured the unfolding disaster. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted from tense to toxic. The boarding process had ground to a halt, a line of frustrated passengers backing up into the jet bridge. Chloe, completely out of her depth, panicked. She didn't look at the system. She didn't call the gate agent to verify the manifest. She looked at Owen Cobb, a man radiating wealth, status, and terrifying anger, and made a choice based entirely on the path of least resistance. "Sir," Chloe said to Charles, her voice trembling but firming up with misplaced authority. "Mr. Cobb is a Diamond Medallion member. I need you to step out of the seat and move to the galley while we sort this out. You are holding up the flight." "I am holding up the flight?" Charles asked, genuine disbelief cracking through his stoic veneer. "He is standing in the aisle screaming at me." "I am sitting quietly in the seat I paid for. Check the manifest on your tablet. It takes 5 seconds. "Don't tell her how to do her job," Owen sneered. "Are you refusing a crew member's orders? Because that's a federal offense, pal." "Please, sir," Chloe pleaded, stepping closer to Charles, invading his space. "If you don't comply, I'm going to have to call the captain and get security." Charles looked at the young woman. He saw the panic in her eyes, the unconscious bias that made her view him as the threat and the screaming millionaire as the victim. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that the truth didn't matter here. The optics had already condemned him in their eyes. "Call the captain," Charles said calmly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Call security. Call whoever you need to call. But I am not giving up my seat because this man threw a temper tantrum." Owen slammed his hand against the overhead bin, the loud smack making several passengers jump. "This is unbelievable. He is being aggressive. Chloe, I feel unsafe. This man is erratic and aggressive." It was a deliberate, weaponized choice of words. Aggressive, erratic, unsafe. Owen Cobb knew exactly what buttons to push to escalate the situation from a customer service dispute to a security threat. "I've had enough of this," Owen declared. He turned on his heel and marched toward the front galley, cornering the lead flight attendant and demanding the captain halt the pushback. Back in the cabin, murmurs broke out. "Why doesn't he just move to the back?" An older woman in row 4 whispered loudly to her husband. "It's probably just a mistake." "Because it's his seat," Sarah Jennings snapped from 3A, unable to stay quiet any longer. She leaned forward, looking at Charles. "Don't move. I saw the whole thing. I'm recording. They're completely out of line." Charles offered Sarah a tight, appreciative nod. But inside, his heart was hammering against his ribs. He had spent his entire life building an unassailable reputation. He was the chief of pediatric surgery. He was a mentor, a lifesaver, a man of immaculate standing. But sitting in this chair, wearing a hoodie, he was instantly reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of the establishment. 10 minutes passed. The heavy air conditioning blasted through the cabin, but Charles felt a bead of sweat roll down his neck. The captain's voice finally came over the PA. "Folks, from the flight deck, we have a minor security issue we need to resolve before we can close the doors. We apologize for the delay and should have you on your way to New York shortly." A security issue. A moment later, heavy footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. 2 large men in dark tactical uniforms with "Police Airport Authority" printed on the back stepped onto the plane. Behind them was a federal air marshal, a grim-faced man with a buzz cut and a radio clipped to his belt. Owen Cobb stood near the cockpit door, pointing a manicured finger down the aisle at Charles. "That's him," Owen said, his voice dripping with venom. He refused to move. He produced a fraudulent ticket, and he threatened me. "I want him off this plane." The 3 officers marched down the aisle. Officer Jenkins, the lead airport police officer, stopped at row 2. He placed his hand on his utility belt, an intimidation tactic designed to establish immediate dominance. "Sir," Jenkins barked, his voice devoid of any customer service polish, "grab your bag and step off the aircraft." Charles looked up at the officer. "Officer, there is a ticketing glitch. I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. If you would just check the passenger manifest." "I'm not going to ask you again," Jenkins interrupted, stepping closer, his physical presence looming over Charles. "You have been asked to leave the aircraft by the flight crew. Under FAA regulations, you are now trespassing. Grab your bag and step off, or you will be physically removed." "Why am I the one being removed?" Charles asked, his voice echoing in the silent cabin. "Mr. Cobb and I both have tickets for this seat. Why is he standing in the galley while I am being threatened with physical force?" "Because he is a Diamond member, and you are causing a disturbance," Jenkins snapped. "Stand up, now." "I have done nothing wrong," Charles said, his voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I am a doctor. I am returning home. I am not a threat to anyone, and I am not leaving this seat until someone checks the actual manifest." "He's resisting," Owen called out from the front. "You see how aggressive he is?" Officer Brody, the second policeman, unclipped his handcuffs. "That's it. Stand up, buddy. You're going for a ride." The sight of the steel handcuffs catching the cabin light sent a shockwave through the passengers. Gasps erupted. Several more phones were suddenly raised, the glowing screens capturing the escalation. Sarah Jennings stood up in 3A. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "He wasn't aggressive. The other guy was screaming at him. Check the system." "Ma'am, sit down and stay out of this, or you'll be joining him," the air marshal growled, pointing a stern finger at Sarah. She reluctantly sat back down, but she angled her phone to ensure she had a clear shot of Charles. Officer Jenkins reached into the row and grabbed Charles's left bicep with crushing force. Charles, running on zero sleep and absolute disbelief, instinctually tensed his arm. "Stop resisting!" Jenkins roared, yanking Charles forward. "I'm not resisting!" Charles shouted back, his voice finally breaking its calm composure, echoing with the raw, guttural pain of a man being stripped of his dignity. "Get your hands off me." But it was too late. The machine of authority had been set in motion, and it did not have a reverse gear. Officer Brody grabbed Charles's right arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced brutality. Charles gasped in pain, his shoulder popping uncomfortably. He was dragged out of his seat and pushed into the narrow aisle. He didn't fight back. He knew better. As a black man in America, he knew that any physical retaliation, any sudden movement, could turn an embarrassing arrest into a fatal encounter. He went limp, allowing them to manhandle him. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut, echoing through the dead silence of the first-class cabin. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of a system failing catastrophically. Charles was shoved forward, his head bowed, forced to do the perp walk past the gawking passengers of the main cabin who were craning their necks to see the commotion. He felt the heat of 100 stares burning into his skin. He saw the judgment in their eyes. What did that guy do? Must be crazy. Good thing they got him off the plane. As they dragged him past the front galley, Owen Cobb was leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, a sickeningly smug smile playing on his lips. Should have just gone to coach, Owen muttered under his breath as Charles was pushed past him. Charles stopped. The officers tried to shove him forward, but he planted his feet, turning his head to look Owen dead in the eye. "You are making a catastrophic mistake," Charles said, his voice dropping to a chilling, dead calm whisper that wiped the smile right off Owen's face. "All of you." He looked at Chloe, the flight attendant, who was trembling, clutching her tablet to her chest. He looked at the officers who were treating him like an animal. "Let's go, tough guy," Jenkins grunted, shoving Charles out the door and onto the jet bridge. The heavy cabin door swung shut behind them with a definitive thud. Inside the plane, Owen Cobb triumphantly took his seat in 2A, letting out a loud sigh of exaggerated relief. "Finally," Owen said loudly, adjusting his suit jacket. "Some peace and quiet. Unbelievable what you have to deal with these days." Chloe Miller scurried over, offering Owen a glass of champagne. "I'm so sorry about that, Mr. Cobb. Thank you for your patience." Sarah Jennings sat behind Owen, her blood boiling. She looked at the video on her phone. 7 minutes of crystal-clear footage. She saw the notification that they were switching to airplane mode as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. She couldn't upload it yet, but as she stared at the back of Owen Cobb's head, she made a silent promise. Meanwhile, out on the cold, sterile jet bridge, Charles Hayes was pushed against the wall. Officer Brody began aggressively patting him down, checking his pockets. "Wallet," Brody demanded. Charles, his hands bound tightly behind his back, nodded toward his back right pocket. Brody yanked the leather wallet out, flipping it open. He pulled out Charles's driver's license. "Charles Hayes," Brody read aloud, shining a small flashlight on the ID. "All right, Dave. You want to explain why you thought it was a good idea to forge a boarding pass and threaten a passenger?" "I didn't forge anything," Charles said, his chest heaving, fighting to keep his breathing steady. "My boarding pass is in my phone, in my left pocket." Jenkins pulled the phone out. The screen was still awake, displaying the digital pass. Jenkins squinted at it. Then he pulled out his own radio, clicking the button to connect to the gate agent. "Brenda, this is airport police. I need you to run a full system check on seat 2A for flight 408. Passenger name, Charles Hayes." There was a long pause, filled only by the crackle of static and the distant roar of a jet engine outside. "Copy that, officer." Brenda's voice came back, sounding slightly annoyed. "I just ran the final manifest before closing the flight out. Seat 2A is Charles Hayes." Jenkins froze. He looked at Brody. "Confirm that, Brenda. The man in 2A is Charles Hayes? What about Owen Cobb?" Another pause, the sound of rapid typing over the radio. When Brenda's voice came back, the annoyance was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. "Officer, Owen Cobb's ticket was cancelled 4 hours ago. His executive assistant rebooked him on the morning flight because his previous connection was delayed. Mr. Cobb is not supposed to be on flight 408. The jet bridge went deathly quiet. Brody slowly lowered the flashlight. Jenkins stared at the radio in his hand, as if it had just turned into a live grenade. "Wait," Jenkins said into the radio, his voice cracking. "If his ticket was cancelled, how did his paper boarding pass scan?" "It didn't," Brenda replied, her voice shaking now. He pushed past the scanner when a large family was boarding. He flashed his diamond medallion card at me and said he was pre-cleared. I didn't scan his paper ticket." The two officers slowly turned their gaze back to the man pinned against the wall. The man in the hoodie. The man who had been telling the truth the entire time. Charles looked back at them, the exhaustion in his eyes now replaced by a cold, searing fire. "Like I said," Charles whispered, "a catastrophic mistake." The click of the handcuff key turning in the lock was the loudest sound on the freezing jet bridge. Officer Brody's hands were visibly shaking as he released the steel bracelets from Charles's wrists. The heavy metal fell away, but the deep, red indentations remained, branding Charles's skin. Charles didn't immediately move his arms. He stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds, letting the gravity of their monumental failure suffocate the two officers. Finally, with a wince, Charles rolled his right shoulder. A sharp, sickening crack echoed off the corrugated metal walls of the bridge, the result of Brody's unnecessarily brutal compliance hold. "Dr. Hayes, Officer Jenkins stammered, the aggressive bulldog demeanor completely evaporating, replaced by the stammering panic of a man who suddenly realized he had just torpedoed his own career. "There was a miscommunication. We were acting on the information provided by the flight crew." "You were acting on your own bias," Charles said. His voice was not a shout. It was a devastatingly surgical strike. "You didn't ask for my ID. You didn't verify the manifest. You took the word of an angry white man in a suit over a black man, sitting quietly in his seat. You assaulted me. You publicly humiliated me, and you unlawfully detained me." At that moment, the door to the terminal burst open. Brenda, the gate agent, practically sprinted down the sloped jet bridge. Her face was ashen, her airline uniform askew. Behind her was Captain Donovan, the night shift commander for the Airport Police Authority, a burly man with silver hair who looked like he had just swallowed a mouthful of broken glass. "Oh my God," Brenda gasped, coming to a halt a few feet from Charles, staring at his red, bruised wrists. "Dr. Hayes, I am so sorry. I didn't—" He flashed his diamond card and walked right past the scanner while I was tagging a stroller for a family. "I assumed—" "You assumed he belonged there," Charles finished for her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "And you assumed I didn't." Captain Donovan stepped forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, instantly adopting the defensive posture of middle management, trying to mitigate a lawsuit. "Dr. Hayes, please accept our deepest apologies. This is a colossal misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible mistake. We are going to make this right. I'm going to personally escort you to our VIP lounge. We'll get you on the first flight to JFK tomorrow morning. First class, fully comped, and we'll throw in a travel voucher for your troubles." Charles stared at Donovan, as if the man had just offered him a Band-Aid for a gunshot wound. "A travel voucher," Charles repeated, the words dripping with absolute contempt. He reached into his left pocket, pulled out his phone, and looked at the screen. It was 12:15 a.m. Through the small window of the jet bridge, Charles watched the massive Boeing 777, Flight 408, slowly push back from the gate, its anti-collision lights flashing in the rainy Seattle night. They were leaving. They had taken his seat, given it to a trespasser, and left him standing in the cold. "Captain Donovan, is it?" Charles asked, reading the man's name tag. "Yes, sir. Let me explain exactly who I am, since your officers couldn't be bothered to ask," Charles said, straightening his posture, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow under the fluorescent lights. "I am Dr. Charles Hayes. I am the Chief of Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital. I am also a sitting board member of the American Medical Association. But more importantly, my wife is Valerie Hayes. Does that name ring a bell, Captain?" Donovan's brow furrowed for a second before all the blood drained from his face. The civil rights attorney. "The federal prosecutor turned civil rights attorney," Charles corrected softly. "She has spent the last 15 years tearing apart corrupt police departments and negligent corporations in federal court, and I am about to call her." Brody looked like he was going to be sick. Jenkins stared at the floor. "But that is only the second biggest problem you have right now," Charles continued, stepping closer to Donovan, forcing the police captain to look him in the eye. "Because you are so focused on covering up your assault on me, you have completely missed the federal crime that just took place under your nose." Donovan blinked, confused. "Federal crime?" Charles pointed a finger at Brenda, who was practically hyperventilating. "Your gate agent just admitted that Owen Cobb bypassed the boarding scanner. His ticket was cancelled. He is not on the electronic manifest, which means a passenger has just boarded a commercial airliner, crossed a secure threshold, and is currently taxiing to the runway without being electronically verified or legally ticketed for that flight." The silence on the jet bridge was absolute, save for the hum of the airport ventilation. Charles leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut like a scalpel. "That is a severe breach of TSA and FAA security protocols. You have an undocumented, unverified passenger on a domestic flight. If you don't ground that plane right now, Captain, I won't just sue the airport authority. I will ensure the FAA rips this airline's operating certificate to shreds, and the Department of Homeland Security buries you and your officers." Donovan's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He realized instantly that Charles was right. The PR nightmare of the arrest was bad, but allowing a plane to take off with an unmanifested passenger who bypassed security, that was a national security incident. People went to federal prison for that. Donovan grabbed the radio strapped to his chest. "Dispatch, this is Command 1. I need a direct patch to the SeaTac control tower right now. Code Red." "Copy, Command 1. Patching you through." "Tower, this is Airport Police Captain Donovan. You need to halt the departure of Delta Echo Flight 408 immediately. Do not clear them for takeoff. We have a severe security breach. Repeat, halt Flight 408. The radio crackled. "Command 1, Tower. Flight 408 is already wheels up. They departed runway 16 left 2 minutes ago. They are currently climbing through 10,000 feet. Brenda let out a small sob, covering her mouth with her hands. Charles looked at the flashing lights of the aircraft disappearing into the heavy cloud cover. "Well, Captain," Charles said, his voice hard as iron, "I suggest you tell them to turn around." 35,000 feet above the jagged peaks of the Montana Rockies, the cabin of Flight 408 was dark and quiet. The seatbelt sign had been turned off, and most of the passengers were asleep, lulled by the steady drone of the massive jet engines. In Seat 2A, Owen Cobb was the picture of affluent comfort. He had kicked off his expensive leather loafers, reclined his pod into a fully flat bed, and was sipping his second glass of vintage Laurent Perrier champagne. He felt a deep, satisfying sense of triumph. He had asserted his dominance. The system had backed him up, and the problem had been removed. He had no idea that a ticking time bomb was sitting directly behind him in seat 3A. Sarah Jennings had not slept. Her heart was still racing from the sheer injustice she had just witnessed. As a freelance investigative journalist, her instincts were screaming at her. She had purchased the $25 high-speed satellite Wi-Fi the second the plane leveled off. She opened the photo gallery on her phone and watched the 7-minute video again. It was damning. It captured Owen's arrogant, racist microaggressions. It captured Chloe's biased incompetence. And it captured the terrifying, unwarranted physical assault on a calm, compliant black man by the airport police. The audio was crystal clear. "I am a surgeon. I am not a threat to anyone." Followed by the sickening click of handcuffs. Sarah didn't hesitate. She opened X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok simultaneously. Her thumbs flew across the keyboard. "Just witnessed the most disgusting display of racism and entitlement on Flight 408. A renowned black surgeon was physically dragged off the plane in handcuffs so a screaming white millionaire could steal his seat. The airline didn't even check the tickets. I am sick to my stomach. Hashtag Flight 408. Hashtag Flying While Black. Hashtag Justice." She uploaded the raw, unedited video. She tagged the airline, the Seattle Airport Authority, the FAA, and 3 major news networks. Then she hit post. In the digital age, virality is a capricious beast, but raw, visceral injustice involving clear villains and heroes is its favorite fuel. Within 10 minutes, the video had 5,000 views. Within 20 minutes, it hit 100,000. A prominent civil rights activist, tweeted it. Then, a massive pop culture aggregate account picked it up. The algorithm seized the engagement, the outrage, the comments, the shares, and poured gasoline on it. "Who is this doctor?" people demanded in the comments. It didn't take long for the internet sleuths to do their work. Someone recognized him. "That's Dr. Charles Hayes. He operated on my niece. He's the chief of surgery at Seattle Children's. He literally saves babies' lives for a living." The outrage morphed from a simmer to an explosive white-hot inferno. The internet turned its Sauron-like gaze toward the other man in the video. The arrogant millionaire. "Who is the guy in the suit? Find him." Facial recognition software, LinkedIn cross-referencing, and corporate websites were scoured by thousands of angry netizens. Within 45 minutes of Sarah posting the video, Owen Cobb was publicly identified. His name, his venture capital firm, his board affiliations, and his corporate email were plastered across every social media platform. His company's website crashed due to the sheer volume of hate traffic. Down on the ground, the airline's corporate headquarters in Atlanta was thrown into absolute chaos. The PR crisis team was ripped from their beds by panicked phone calls. When the VP of Communications saw the video, she nearly vomited. But it was the director of corporate security who triggered the real avalanche. While investigating the viral video, they pulled the gate data for Flight 408 to figure out how 2 men had the same seat. They discovered what Charles Hayes already knew. Owen Cobb was an unmanifested ghost. He had bypassed the federal security checkpoint. The director called the FAA and the TSA immediately. The response from the federal agencies was swift and merciless. Back on Flight 4, 08. Chloe Miller was standing in the forward galley, quietly crying. She had been checking her phone on the crew Wi-Fi and saw the video. She saw her own face, her own weak, biased compliance, immortalized for millions to see. The comments calling her out were brutal. Suddenly, the secure intercom from the flight deck chimed 3 times, the emergency signal. Chloe wiped her eyes and picked up the handset. "Yes, Captain?" "Chloe, secure the cabin immediately." The captain's voice was tense, stripped of its usual reassuring drawl. "We have a massive problem. Dispatch just ordered us to turn the aircraft around." "Turn around?" Chloe gasped. "Captain, we're halfway to North Dakota. Are we diverting for a medical?" "No," the captain said grimly. "We are returning to Seattle. TSA and corporate security just informed us we have an unmanifested passenger on board who bypassed the boarding scanner. It's a federal security breach. We have to fly 3 hours back to SeaTac, and law enforcement will be waiting on the tarmac." Chloe felt the blood drain to her feet. Who is the passenger?" "Seat 2A. A Mr. Owen Cobb." The handset slipped from Chloe's trembling fingers, dangling by its cord. In the cabin, the subtle shift in the aircraft's pitch was barely noticeable at first, but then the left wing dipped sharply. The massive Boeing 777 began a sweeping 180-degree turn in the night sky. The G-forces pressed the passengers slightly into their seats. Owen Cobb stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked out the window. The moon, which had been illuminating the right side of the aircraft, was now shining directly into his window on the left. He frowned, pressing the flight attendant call button. Before Chloe could respond, the PA system crackled to life. The captain didn't use the pleasant, conversational tone reserved for turbulence. It was the hard, authoritative voice of a commander executing orders. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. I need your attention immediately. Due to a severe mandatory federal security issue regarding an unverified passenger on board, the FAA has ordered this aircraft to turn around. We are currently heading back to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport." A collective gasp ripped through the cabin. People bolted upright. "Upon landing," the captain continued, "nobody is to stand up. The aircraft will be met by federal marshals and airport police. Please remain in your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened." The cabin exploded into murmurs of panic and confusion. Owen Cobb sat up, furious. "Unbelievable!" he shouted to no one in particular. "A security issue. Now I'm going to miss my morning meetings. This airline is a complete joke." In seat 3A, Sarah Jennings slowly lowered her phone. She looked at the view count on her video. 4.2 million views. She leaned forward, her face inches from the gap between the seats, looking directly at the back of Owen Cobb's silver hair. "Oh, Mr. Cobb," Sarah said, her voice dripping with a terrifyingly sweet vindication. "I don't think you need to worry about your morning meetings. You don't have a job anymore." The 3-hour flight back to Seattle was an agonizing, suffocating ordeal. The cabin lights had been turned up to their maximum brightness, a harsh, unforgiving glare that stripped away any illusion of comfort. No one spoke above a whisper. The flight attendants had retreated to the galleys, pulling the curtains shut, leaving the passengers to marinate in a thick soup of anxiety and speculation. In seat 2A, Owen Cobb's initial fury had curdled into a seething, restless agitation. He checked his phone repeatedly, but the aircraft's Wi-Fi had been disabled by the flight crew per federal protocol, leaving him entirely cut off from the outside world. He tapped his fingers aggressively against his armrest, mentally drafting the vicious emails he was going to send to the airline's CEO, a man he had golfed with twice. He was going to have people fired. He was going to ruin careers over this inconvenience. Behind him, Sarah Jennings sat perfectly still, a cold, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She didn't need Wi-Fi anymore. She knew exactly what was waiting for them on the ground. At 3:14 a.m., Flight 408 touched down on the rain-slicked runway of SeaTac International Airport. The thrust reversers roared, slamming the passengers forward in their seats. But instead of taxiing to the gate, the massive Boeing 777 turned off onto a remote taxiway and came to a dead stop far away from the terminal. Outside the windows, the darkness was suddenly shattered by a chaotic strobe of flashing red and blue lights. A dozen marked and unmarked federal vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Armored tactical trucks from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security formed a perimeter, their high-beam spotlights cutting through the driving rain and illuminating the fuselage like a suspect in a police lineup. A collective murmur of genuine terror rippled through the main cabin. This wasn't a standard diversion. This was a full-scale federal incident. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain in your seats with your hands visible," the captain's voice boomed over the PA, stripped of all customer service warmth. "Federal agents are boarding the aircraft." The forward cabin door was opened from the outside. The cold Seattle air rushed in, bringing with it the severe, uncompromising presence of federal authority. 5 agents in tactical gear, wearing windbreakers emblazoned with FBI and TSA, marched onto the plane. Leading them was Special Agent in Charge Thomas Barrett, a man with a jawline like an anvil and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Owen Cobb scoffed, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up in the aisle, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. "Finally," Owen announced loudly, fixing his suit jacket. He looked at Agent Barrett. "Listen, I am Owen Cobb. I have a very important meeting in New York, and this airline's incompetence has cost me millions. I want the name of whoever is responsible for this diversion, because my lawyers—" "Owen Cobb," Agent Barrett interrupted, his voice cutting through Owen's bluster like a machete. "Yes, and I expect a full escort to a private charter immediately," Owen demanded. Barrett didn't blink. He gave a sharp nod to the 2 heavily armed tactical agents behind him. "Take him." Before Owen could process the command, the 2 agents lunged forward. They grabbed Owen by the shoulders, spinning him around with a violent force that knocked the wind out of him. They slammed him face first into the bulkhead wall near the galley. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Owen screamed, his voice pitching up into a reedy, panicked squeal. "Do you know who I am? Get your hands off me!" "Owen Cobb, you are under arrest for violating federal aviation security protocols, criminal trespassing on a commercial aircraft, and interfering with a flight crew," Barrett stated calmly, his voice carrying down the dead-silent cabin. The sound of heavy, tactical steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Owen Cobb's wrists echoed through the first-class cabin. It was the exact same sound that had echoed just a few hours earlier. But this time, the cosmic scales of justice were violently balancing themselves. "This is a mistake!" Owen thrashed wildly, his expensive suit wrinkling, his perfectly slicked hair falling into his face. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. I have a ticket. The black guy, the guy who was in my seat, he's the one who was causing a disturbance. You're arresting the wrong person." Agent Barrett stepped closer, leaning in so only Owen and the first few rows could hear. "Dr. Charles Hayes is a federally cleared manifested passenger. You, Mr. Cobb, cancelled your ticket at 7 p.m. last night, bypassed a federal security checkpoint without a valid boarding pass, and boarded an aircraft you had no legal right to be on. You grounded a commercial airliner." Owen's face went bone white. The color drained from his cheeks as the reality of his own arrogant shortcut finally caught up with him. He had flashed his status card and walked past the gate agent because he thought the rules didn't apply to him. He thought his wealth made him invisible to consequences. As the agents dragged a stunned, hyperventilating Owen Cobb down the aisle toward the exit, Sarah Jennings stood up in seat 3A. "Hey, Mr. Cobb," Sarah called out, holding up her phone, the screen glowing brightly in the dim cabin. Owen looked back at her, his eyes wide with panic and humiliation. "Your morning meetings have been cancelled," Sarah said loudly. "Check Twitter when you get your phone call. You're the most famous racist in America right now." As they hauled him out into the freezing rain, a federal agent handed Owen his confiscated belongings in a clear plastic bag. Inside the bag, Owen's smartphone screen lit up. Despite the cracked screen guard, the notifications were visible. Thousands of them, flooding in by the second. Missed calls from his board of directors. Frantic texts from his PR team. News alerts with his face plastered next to the word disgrace. His life, as he knew it, was over. While the drama unfolded on the tarmac, a very different kind of reckoning was taking place inside a sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room, deep within the administrative offices of SeaTac Airport. Dr. Charles Hayes sat at the head of a long mahogany table, nursing a cup of black coffee. He had still not slept. His wrists were wrapped in ice packs provided by a terrified airport paramedic. Across from him sat the upper echelon of the people responsible for his nightmare. Airport Police Captain Donovan, Officers Jenkins and Brody, the airline's Regional Vice President of Operations, Gregory Fields, and the sobbing gate agent, Brenda. They all looked like they were waiting for a firing squad. At 4 a.m., the heavy wooden door to the conference room swung open, and the firing squad walked in. Valerie Hayes was a force of nature. Dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal trench coat, a leather briefcase gripped in one hand, she walked into the room with the terrifying, predatory grace of a great white shark entering a seal enclosure. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't offer a polite smile. She walked straight to Charles, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and examined his bruised wrists. Her eyes hardened into obsidian. She turned slowly to face the terrified executives and police officers. "I am Valerie Hayes," she said, her voice smooth, icy, and vibrating with lethal intent. "I am Dr. Hayes's wife, and as of 3 hours ago, his legal counsel. You have exactly 5 minutes to explain to me why I shouldn't dismantle this airport authority, bankrupt this airline, and see to it that the federal government indicts every single person in this room." Gregory Fields, the airline VP, swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mrs. Hayes, we are profoundly sorry. We have already fired the flight attendant, Chloe Miller, and suspended Brenda pending a full investigation. We are prepared to offer Dr. Hayes a 7-figure settlement immediately to keep this out of court." Valerie didn't even blink. "A 7-figure settlement is what I would ask for if you spilled hot coffee on my husband. You dragged a renowned pediatric surgeon off a plane in handcuffs because your staff chose to believe the racist, baseless accusations of a white trespasser over the factual, digital proof provided by a black doctor." She slammed a thick manila folder onto the table. It sounded like a gunshot. "That is a draft of the federal civil rights lawsuit I am filing at 9 a.m., Valerie said, her eyes pinning Captain Donovan to his chair. "Captain, your officers committed assault, battery, false imprisonment, and racial profiling. I have already spoken with the mayor and the chief of police. Officers Jenkins and Brody will surrender their badges by sunrise, or I will make sure the Department of Justice opens a sweeping civil rights probe into your entire precinct." Jenkins and Brody looked at the floor, their careers evaporating before their eyes. As for Owen Cobb, Valerie continued, turning her venom back to the airline VP, I expect your airline to cooperate fully with the FAA and the FBI. He bypassed your security. He commandeered my husband's seat. He initiated a false police report. If your legal team attempts to shield him to save your own corporate liability, I will subpoena every internal communication your company has sent in the last decade regarding racial bias. He won't be shielded, Gregory Fields stammered, wiping his brow. Actually, Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Cobb's venture capital firm held an emergency board meeting 20 minutes ago. Because of the viral video, they invoked a morality clause. He was stripped of his CEO title and ousted from his own company. Charles finally looked up from his coffee. The exhaustion was still there, but a quiet, profound sense of justice began to settle over him. The system that had violently turned against him just hours ago was now devouring the man who had weaponized it. We want to make this right, Dr. Hayes, the airline VP pleaded, his voice cracking. Name your terms, please. Charles slowly removed the ice packs from his wrists. He looked at the men and women across the table, people who, just a few hours ago, viewed him as a criminal, a threat, a second-class citizen. My wife will handle the financial settlement, which will be substantial, and which I will be donating entirely to the pediatric cardiology wing of Seattle Children's Hospital in your airline's name, Charles said, his voice calm, steady, and commanding. He stood up, towering over the room. But my personal terms are simple, Charles continued. You will mandate comprehensive independent bias training for every gate agent, flight attendant, and officer in this airport. You will change your policies so that a passenger's status tier never overrides federal ticketing protocols. And finally, Charles looked directly at Captain Donovan. You will escort me to the VIP lounge. You will bring me a hot breakfast, and you will put me in seat 2A on the very next flight to New York. And you will make damn sure nobody wakes me up. By 7 a.m., the sun was rising over the Seattle skyline. Dr. Charles Hayes, freshly showered and fed, boarded the morning flight to JFK. As he walked down the jet bridge, the new gate agent and the entire flight crew stood at attention, treating him with the profound respect he had earned, not just as a diamond-tier human being, but as a man who had stood his ground against an avalanche of entitlement. He took his place in seat 2A, slipped on his noise-cancelling headphones, and as the plane lifted off into the bright morning sky, he finally closed his eyes and slept. The shocking events of Flight 408 serve as a stark, unforgettable reminder that wealth and status do not grant anyone the right to rewrite reality or trample on the dignity of others. Dr. Charles Hayes faced a terrifying intersection of systemic bias and toxic entitlement. But his quiet dignity and unshakable truth ultimately dismantled his aggressors. True power doesn't come from a loud voice or a platinum card. It comes from integrity. While Owen Cobb lost his empire to his own arrogance, Dr. Hayes walked away with his head held high, proving that justice, when demanded, will eventually find its seat. If this story made your blood boil and cheer for justice, hit that like button right now. Have you ever witnessed unhinged entitlement in public? Tell us your story in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video to remind everyone that character beats privilege, and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories of justice served.